Hey there, guys. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys, yet again with your host and friend in neighbourhood, far-right thug, Mr. George Cresswell. Hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. Got a very interesting guest on the podcast for you today. She used to go by a name that I believe, like Voldemort, we can't actually say the name anymore. Is that correct?
Yeah, don't say that name.
I say we can't say the previous name, but it is Mrs. Victoria Rixon, who goes by, I believe it is now the Uncensored Midwife. Right. So I want to get Victoria on the podcast for a little while because she has a very, very interesting story. I'm sure if you've seen some of the other podcasts that she's been on, and some very, very important things, very worrying things that I think we need to talk about, and that's why I wanted to bring it over to you. So without any more unnecessary rambling from me, I'm going to hand you over to Victoria now so she can give herself a little bit of an introduction so you can find out who she is if you've never heard of her before. Victoria, thank you very much for coming on.
Hi, George. Thank you so much for giving me this little space. And somebody said to me the other day, if you spoke to this person, I was like, I don't want to go on the big accounts. This is about the people. This is about the grassroots. This is about getting the actual people who haven't been merged into this financial web of everything else that we can just sit and talk like two people together. So thank you for having me. So for most of the people that don't know me, I'm Victoria. I'm an ex-NHS midwife in Plymouth. I worked in the same hospital and trained there, and I hadn't worked anywhere else. So for people that say you shouldn't say where you worked, it's on my LinkedIn CV anyway. And you can't lie on your CV, so you've got to tell the truth, eh?
Mm-hmm.
So I started, and it was very, very oppressive. I was 30 years old when I started training, so I'd had quite an extensive life working, from the age of 15, worked in River Island, and I worked in other places. And, you get to know the ins and outs of employment, etiquette and how to talk to each other, engage with people, conflict resolution, all those sorts of things. But it was funny, they never emphasised all of that in your training or every year in models. It's only when you really enter the NHS that they're really trying to indoctrinate you into that further system. So when I started as a student, that was when I started realising how bad it was. And I couldn't work it out. I put it down to my divorce. I thought, I'm going through a family breakup. I've got 3 children. I've got a very young child. He was only 1 at the time. And I just thought I'm having a really awful time from my divorce. Although that is quite a lot to deal with, I didn't identify that there were some issues within the actual midwifery profession. So the first red flag really was one of the lecturers was far too friendly. A male lecturer who was texting inappropriate things, saying inappropriate things, and I raised that internally, and it was just sort of thrown away as a side comment. And I actually provided a USB stick with all the documents on it. So that kind of was like, oh, there's something not right with this. And then when I actually started training, I realised I was seeing things that I didn't see when I was in labour, and when I was giving birth at home, I just started seeing these malpractices. And as a group, we actually raised some concerns with the uni. Then we were told, you'll understand when you become a midwife why we do these things. And a bit like why you beat your children and then say, you'll understand when you have kids, you'll beat them. Yeah, okay. So I couldn't quite place what was happening. It took me a long time. For someone that's intelligent, has an emotional intelligence, I couldn't work this out. It took me a long, long time. So fast forward into, my career, I just started seeing these malpractices. The policies and employment law were there, but they weren't being adhered to. Health and safety wasn't being adhered to. Your union wasn't present. The HR were for the management. And it just spiraled. And then, when COVID hit, there was nothing left for me to live for in it, really. It all made sense that it was it wasn't properly investigated. There wasn't the right evidences for the vaccines. And then once you've lost faith in that, it's not possible. If you have full integrity, it's not possible for you to remain another second in there. So here I am, really. So I don't know how much you want to elaborate or whether you want to ask me questions. George, you just kind of lead the way.
No, I think the big word you brought up there, which is a common thing I see with a lot of people that are speaking out against these things. In the initial call we had brought up Andrew Bridgen, for example, who was one of the premier voices trying to get the initial warning signs out around the vaccine rollout and stuff like that, and has stuck to that message. It has been vindicated seemingly at every turn. But again, integrity, the people that are speaking out on these things. I'm not sure whether you've seen that Michael Knowles from the Daily Wire recently had somebody on his show. I can't remember his name. I think it's Andy Wakefield, who was the guy who published the initial 1998 Lancet paper, which was horrendously misrepresented. Very, very eye-opening, very, very eye-opening interview. I would strongly recommend anybody goes and watches it. But again, people having integrity, and that's typically the people that are willing to suffer this kind of persecution, whether it's at the hands of the police, whether it's the court system, from their own colleagues. As you've mentioned, the one thing I want to go here, you've mentioned, it says, a quote from you, I believe it was from the Mel Clark interview, the NHS is a dark entity. And, goes to show the indoctrination and stuff like that goes along with all of this stuff, and how deeply entrenched people can get into it. And then I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, it was your initial experience of having a home birth that sort of sparked your want to go into this field to sort of give mothers who are about to give birth that kind of feeling that you had during that home birth. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, so I've got 4 sons. Mm-hmm. So I had one in Scotland when I was 19, so I was very young. So it's naturally you don't know what to expect. Then I had my second one in Portsmouth when I was married, or just before I got married. And that was a, lovely, quick birth, went into the hospital, had a baby and came home. And then my third birth, I moved to Devon, where my, at the time, husband's family was from, and we love it here. And when I found out I was pregnant, I don't know where it came from, because I didn't really understand the option of choice, but I just knew I wanted a home birth. And because my health, I've never been overweight. I mean, I was when I was first diabetic, because I wasn't titrating my insulin very well. I don't even know why I even said that, because if I'm overweight, I'm overweight. But, so I remember being pregnant and saying to my ex-husband, I really want a home birth. And he was like, oh my God, no, my friend's mum's child was disabled and everybody's fear was being projected onto me. But I just knew in my heart, no, this is what I want. This is what my baby wants. My baby chose to, because you choose your own birth. Women and baby choose their own birth, because it's a dual connection. And I laboured pretty much on my own without any pain relief. Now, I'm not going to lie, labour is painful, but when you get into a rhythm and you get into a connection with your mind, it's less painful. And I had this amazing midwife who is a colleague. And I have a lot of admiration for this midwife. She's the first person I ever met that is still a midwife today. She was just inspiring. She sat back. She let me do my own thing. She didn't get involved. She just let me birth. And she was incredible. And she created this space of, you know what you're doing, Vic, just go with it. And I remember when I was fully dilated, I remember sitting up off the ball and I'd finished all my contractions and I just went, I think I'm fully dilated. I didn't know that. She knew, though, because she'd seen it. So she said, I think you might well be. So I went upstairs to the bathroom, came back down, and then I just looked around and I thought, right, where am I going to birth? I hadn't planned where I was going to birth. I just birthed. And it was animal instinct. It was that mammal instinct. My body just did it. No one touched me. No one intervened with me. Oh my God, George, this experience, I can't even tell you. I wish you could bottle it up, because when I was pushing out my son, I can remember looking over at the door and I remember my mother-in-law looking at me, but then all of a sudden I was standing next to my mother-in-law looking down when I was pushing. It was so out of body. And then I really reflect on this now and I realised that birth is sacred, it's private, it's a ritual, a passage, whatever you want to call it. It's not what it says in the books. It's everything that it says. So for me, when I birthed him out, I felt no pain. I mean, people say the head is the worst bit. Don't even remember feeling it because I was so euphorically connected to my feminine space. And, I'm not a massive, power to the pussy type person. Or I'm not that person. I'm not like that. I've got a lot of masculine energy as well as feminine, but I've also got 4 boys that keep me in a different space at times. And I've got a husband and there's not actually a lot of females around me. So I wasn't ever that type of person. But if I could tell you that the power I had in that moment, I could have birthed an army because I felt that incredible. And I remember afterwards saying, I'm never doing that again, but I'm doing that again because it was so amazing. And that was it. And I wanted to be a midwife. Something said, right, go and do that for women. George, how many women do you think I did that with in my career?
I think I'm led to believe it was either very low or 0, if my memory serves.
It was like 2.
There you go, 2.
But none in that situation. I've been to 2 home births, but they've never been like that.
Am I correct in saying it basically when you went and done them from the other side, you had it yourself, or when you experienced it from the other side, it was nothing like what you experienced?
I was just this medicine dispenser, ticking boxes and trying to navigate not being sued or put in prison. That's the truth of where I'm at now. People will go, how dare you say that about my career? Okay, well, when you leave and you look back, you'll realise that isn't the role of the midwife. Why do they have to write the role of the midwife on paper? It's in your heart how to look after women. It's in your heart. They don't write you a book when you leave the hospital and say, there's your manual to be a parent. So why do you need a manual to tell you how to be a midwife? I appreciate you need a manual for policy with litigation, but actually to be the role of the midwife has to be, in a line. It's a bit like taking the policeman's oath. I think, what? The doctor's oath, you do no harm. So for me, it just never really made sense. And I suppose I was waiting for that real moment of, I'm a midwife and this is amazing and this is what it feels like. And it just never came. It just never came. And I think I wasn't a big drinker. I've never been a big drinker. I didn't really drink when I was younger. It took me a long time to ever really get drunk. I just wasn't really like that. I drank a lot. I was like cane in a bottle every time I came home from work. And, and that's just not me. Like now, I can't remember the last time I had a glass of wine or an alcoholic drink, maybe 2 weeks ago. So I do it when I want to do it. But it just didn't match what I remembered as a mother. But if you imagine, George, I go into that straight from uni, straight from school, straight to uni, into midwife, and you haven't had any children, well, then you are going to think that's normal, what they're doing now. So for the ones that have a bit of more of a brain and life experience and like brain exposure to the world and people, and you'll know that that's not right.
I think then, as you mentioned, the integrity before, that other knowledge, so to speak, that experience that these other, young students or other people don't have, but they also don't, school system doesn't want to give them, makes you a target for this kind of stuff even more. Because then you're going to be the kind of person that stands up and says, no, this is wrong, or this isn't in the best interests of these young mothers or mothers-to-be. As you mentioned, that correct me if I'm wrong, the whole system behind it, the way you saw it, was that it was very uncaring, uncompassionate, and more concerned with people not going to jail over nursing the families themselves, nurturing the families themselves, with this really bad culture within the system. And you mentioned, which when I watched the Mel Clark interview, you had this very stark image in my head when I heard this about the midwife that was crying in the cupboard about this whole, about everything that was going on. It just seems that everything from there being the university teaching, and this goes all across many other things as well, where you have all these protests going on in universities for causes that when you ask the students there that are protesting, they can't tell you why they're protesting or what it's for, really. They had this trumped up, vague cause that they've been told to go out and hold flags and, for a lot of times, commit acts of terror for. But with this, you don't really hear too much about it coming from this side. But it's so important, especially when you're talking about bringing young children into the world, that this is where the focus is. I'm just trying to think, how does... And it just, for somebody like me, it's just like the people going into this field, you would think it's because they want to take care of these people that are going through this very pivotal point in their lives of bringing a new life into the world. How did the system of values get so turned upside down, do you think?
I don't believe any of the students that I trained with or any of the midwives that I worked with go to work to be to not give good care. Now, that I never saw any midwife deliver care. I'm trying to get this right. I didn't ever see a midwife just deliberately be mean to somebody. I never saw anyone hitting anybody, or it's the systematic structure that it doesn't enable you to be the midwife that you want to be. So, for instance, you've got 20 women being induced and you haven't spoken to any of them. To the women I've been neglected by a midwife, to the midwife, that's normal. So you've got this real psyops on both sides. It's really hard to crumble it down, because you've got a midwife saying, well, I did great care because nobody died and everybody's all right. But actually, have you sat down and nurtured anybody? Have you sat down and do you know their name? Do you know their partner's name? Do you know their children's names? Do you know where they live? No, most of your patients, you don't even know where they live, because all you do is you look at a name and it's on the computer. So it's that bit that's the crap bit about the reality of midwifery, is that you don't go to give bad care, but to the women, they're having terrible care. So the midwives will say, and I will say, I always gave great care. But actually, when I think about it in reality, women might say, you didn't look after me right, because how can I? I didn't get to sit down and say, George, what makes you tick? What can I do to make you feel safe, nurtured, heard? And if you said to me, Victoria, I'm really insecure and I need you to check on me every hour, and I didn't do that, that's bad care. So it's it's both sides, isn't it? It's this, I'm delivering midwifery care in line with the policy, the code of practice and all of the X, Y, and Z, but the system's so overrun and so broken and so underfunded and so short-staffed that you're not then delivering the care that is needed. So you're inadvertently breaching your code and you're inadvertently causing negligence. So I think midwives, when they hear me say this, they're like, oh, how could you say that about us? I don't go to work to harm. I don't go to work to harm. But I tell you what I did do, George. I wrote to the NMC and I wrote these very words. I inadvertently breached my code of conduct every single day. People were like, don't write that. Why? It's the truth. Take back my pin. I inadvertently breached my code because I couldn't deliver X, Y, and Z of safety, communication, courage, commitment. I couldn't do it all. I'm really sorry. But also, as a governing body, you've allowed people to call me a baby killer online, and you haven't supported me. Why do I want to be on your, why would I want to be anywhere near you? So for me, it's not as easy to say you deliver bad care. I might have delivered poor care because the system didn't allow me to deliver the care that I wanted to give. So, for instance, if you wanted a home birth and you couldn't have it, you're going to be absolutely devastated, and that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life, right? I didn't get my home birth. You had a choice, though. You could have just had a home birth and had a doula or free birthed. People will be horrified I've said that. But that is the reality of where we're getting to. Like, people have to start making their own choices, because the minute you cross that door into that hospital, you're handing over your informed consent and you're handing over your whole consent. Where are your rights? So, yeah, it's a big topic. I mean, we could talk about this for years.
Absolutely. And there's so many other things, especially from that call we had initially as well. There's so much stuff that's going on seemingly behind the scenes. Such where you mentioned they're covering up, baby deaths and stuff like that. All of this stuff the managers are making. I got a quote by here. Where is it? So you said here, usually 8 to 10 on a shift, and this goes back to the understaffing problem you mentioned, but routinely it was about one to two people. So again, you had this gigantic list of names that people you had to take care of. And then, as you mentioned, however many names you've got on this list, you've got no chance of being able to do all your rounds consistently and be able to sit down with them for conversation, whatever it might be. And the managers or somebody, I don't want to say it was like a particular manager or anything like that, but you were quoted in saying the response basically was, is that a you problem or ours? That was the response that you were given, I believe. And it just goes to speak again to this awful culture that seems to be at the heart of really all public institutions that I'm seeing it, in my opinion. It seems to be at the heart of like the school system that seem to be more and more just, left-wing indoctrination factories, in my opinion. But just how bad are we talking when it comes to like the managerial oversight and this thing where you mentioned like the scale and the time frame of like covering up baby deaths and stuff like that? How does it get that bad?
Well, I've never known them to cover up baby deaths in my hospital. So when I left, I took my localized issues and I started breaking them down. So I started looking at the management structure, what's happening with the union, what's happening with all of this. Now, all I know is that when I reported an incident internally, which is on our datexing system, which is in majority of the hospitals, I datex something as a serious incident. Now that I'm allowed to have a clinical judgment because I am a registrant. I have a registration 17D 0059E. That was my number. Okay. I, under that number, have a lawful and legal obligation to make my clinical judgment of a situation based on what I know in my experience and what is going on in the environment around me. I don't believe anybody should downgrade that based on their judgment when they were not there. So after a serious incident where a lady laboured for 10.5 hours on her own in triage behind a curtain and had absolutely no care and had very brief care before her baby was born, severely compromised and had neonatal resuscitation and went to intensive care at the baby unit, I put that as a serious incident because of staffing, and it was downgraded to a mild, which meant it was a desktop review and it went in a top drawer. So how can I work with these managers? How can I work with these people? I cannot work in that environment and never will do. So when you're starting to talk about your own managers, I then think, well, who was agreeing that I know this midwife, she's a good-hearted person, but she's doing what she's told in line of her box, her policy. And then the next manager does her box, and the next manager does her box. Whereas you mentioned there about what left wing and right wing. I'm not either.
Oh, there we are. Hello?
Hello? Go on the other side.
There we are. Awesome. Right, we're back. Oh, there we go. It's straight in recording. All right, awesome. Let's go.
So I didn't see any cover up of baby deaths in the hospital that I was in. Okay. So when I left, I saw this as a localized problem. I was trying to, how can I make change in the Plymouth area? And I thought, right, I've got the power, I've got the knowledge, I've got the tenacity, I've got the carbon, footballs. I'll go do it. And it was pretty horrific, the experience that came after that, obviously, because you then know that I was threatened. So when I left, the day before I left and handed my notice in on the Tuesday, the 8th of February, on the 7th of February, I was at work and a lady laboured behind a curtain for 10 hours. We only had 2 members of staff on shift, 3 and then 4 to support as the day went on, but it was so busy. And I had more than one patient all day. So I actually day text that this lady had laboured behind a curtain. She had a baby with a very poor outcome who went to NICU after resuscitation and at staffing levels. That day text was downgraded to a mild from a serious. So I I've struggled with that more because it's denying the woman the truth about the systemic failings, which is why it escalates, because women then have to go through legal to get their answers, to get their voice heard. And it just creates this vortex of trauma, and it makes it worse, and it makes women more angry. So I just wish some of my colleagues would actually grab their bollocks and just say, no, I'm telling the woman what happened. What's the worst it's going to do? It's doing damage anyway. So I'm disappointed that my colleagues sometimes just go in this box, and go, right, I can only do this bit of my job, and then I can only do this bit of my job. And I'm going to say this, there's no way on earth that I signed an oath to ever not bring the trust into disrepute against patient safety. It was never a sentence. So I don't care whether they're, this big entity. I will never, ever do that. And it just wouldn't happen naturally because I'm not like that. But I think what's really important to highlight here is that midwives actually don't agree with a lot of what I'm saying because they're in the system. They're wrapped up in, there's a bit of ego that comes from being a midwife. Like when people say, what do you do? I always used to look for their reaction when I said, I'm a midwife. They go, oh, I love it. Oh my God. And they want to tell you all about their birth, and they want to tell you all about their, their problems that they've had after birth, or that years ago it was it's wonderful because women just want to tell each other everything. So that point in a woman's life is enormous, and it can have an impact on her whole life. So to tell people you're a midwife is a wonderful thing. I don't have that same feeling anymore. It actually feels toxic to me. So there is an element of ego in it, I think, for a lot of people, unhealed trauma, like, oh, look at me, I'm a midwife. But really ask yourself, are you a midwife? If you ask the Highland midwife if she's a midwife, or the Welsh community midwife who sits in a clinic and just looks after women and gets left alone, if they're a midwife, they might say yes. But really, really, truly, the essence of a midwife is this what we are. So what I will say on the baby death cover-up is that I do know there are midwives, because now obviously I'm very outspoken and people come to me. I've had a lot of messages recently from very high up midwives and trusts saying to me, I see you, well done, people are watching, thank you for leading the way. I've had someone say, I want to whistleblow, but I'm scared. And I don't tell them to do it. I just say, when you're ready, you'll make your choice. So people are coming, but I do know that midwives have told the BBC and Sky that they're covering up baby deaths in a hospital somewhere around England.
Mm.
And they've
in
never...
an undisclosed location.
Undisclosed. And they have never, ever published that. They've never, ever put it out there. And that came from a midwife that worked there. So this is what I find absolutely harrowing, George, that a bit like Piers Morgan blocking me. He only blocked me because I said, if you just put my story out when I came to you, think of how many babies you could have saved. And then, because
Piers does love that block button, doesn't he? It has to be said. He does love that block button.
Apparently, I've been through an initiation. Now he's blocked me.
I was gonna say that. I was saying I know I've only got about 300 followers or so I probably didn't even register on his radar. I'm trying. George, I want the privilege.
You don't need more than 300 followers. You just keep doing what you're doing. It will come.
I was going to say, I'll try. I'll keep trying. It's almost like a kind of thing. You could have it framed upon on the wall. You know what I mean? You could have that thing or put on the fridge, as a really...
I'll put it in the bin.
In the bin. in there. So yeah, again, really dark things going on at the heart of the system. I was very lucky in my personal purview that when I was at my most vulnerable in hospital with my health, I received very good care, at least as far as I know. I know just as many people that don't. It's obviously the system has problems, but it seems as though when you're going to the BBC, Sky News, who seem to, for lack of a better term, toe the establishment line, they're not going to really publish things that are going to put the system that's in place into disrepute. So I'm not really too surprised by that. Similar to, coming back to it again, because this is something I believe in the call you mentioned, that this is something you completely changed your stance on in a big way, is that especially with these mothers-to-be, they were, again, talking about putting policy over nurturing kind of thing. Am I right in saying there were dates that they were given that they were going to be induced, and a lot of the times then they either missed the date, so there was no updates or anything like that, giving them this fear about being induced, like however long it was in advance, telling them they had to be here on this date and then it would never happen, but then also pushing like things like vaccines on them despite knowing complications associated with them, where you mentioned for things like blood pressure issues which went up, pregnancy bleeds that went up, is it abruption? Is that one of them? Abruption that went up, postnatal bleeding, blood clots and sudden deaths, all of these things at a times 2 vaccines commonality you mentioned. Is these things really things that we got to be worried about, especially like if you're thinking about bringing children into the world and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot to unpick there, George. There's an awful lot.
Yes.
But if you think the role of a midwife is to provide holistic care, as they say, and give informed choice and provide evidence-based practice, that's drummed into you. But most people don't know how to read evidence, including myself. I don't know fully how to understand all of it. It's very, very difficult to understand, all the numbers or the p-values. People just don't. And because they use different models of research, it's really hard to understand them all. You might know the basics of, your systematic review or your gold standard stuff, but, quantitative over qualitative is a lot harder for some people to understand. So the majority of people wouldn't go and say, hold on, before I give that drug, I'd really like to go and read the evidence on it, because the system is set up that you don't have time to do that. And if you do that, you'll then become a problem, because the system will say, well, you're too slow for the system, so we really need to move you. So you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. However, I'm a perfectionist and I have to do things properly. So my NMC record is exemplary. I never had any feedback from any patients that I was aware of. The trust might have had some and they rebutted it, whatever, I don't know. So I've never been called in on a cause for concern, or, I've never been part of any investigation. I've only ever once or twice written a recollection of events. So in all, that's an exemplary career in the system that we're in. But you're also not trained to critically analyse. It's either in you or it's not. I think it's part of breaking down your qualities of who you are. So if I saw women coming into triage with sickness and diarrhea and they all lived in a particular part of Plymouth, I would be thinking, oh, is there a bug in the area, or have they all bought something from the local shop? Or do you know what I mean? Is the water contaminated? So when COVID hit, and you got to remember, I think pregnant women were probably the easiest thing to figure out, because they didn't have the vaccines at all for the first year. So when COVID struck, the women that were pregnant were told to isolate and be at home. Now, those women weren't vaccinated in the first year. So when those women came in, the adverse effects weren't any different. The outcomes weren't any different. The mental health was different. Of course, the suicide was the biggest killer of women. So when I saw the first COVID patient come in, we were all sat there. When I think back on this in my experience, I think, oh my God, what was I even thinking? I was waiting in anticipation as this lady walked down the corridor just to see if she looked like an alien. What's she going to look like? What does COVID look like? And she just donned in with a little mask on and her bump and hello, and just walked in, and I thought, oh, she's normal. She didn't even know she had COVID. It just came up on her test, of course. So in she goes to the room, and we're all like, oh, it's the first COVID. Everyone's whispering the COVID positive. And then over time, now I had a lot of sickness between 2020 and 2023. That time I took a lot of time off sick, but that was a lot of the time I was doing my reflecting. I was really going in a rabbit hole. I was doing my digging on everything about, the UN and looking at where the money's coming from. And I went dark. And I mean, to the point that I think I sat and rocked on the sofa for about 7 weeks at one point. I was like, what is this really happening? So in 2020, I hadn't quite put my finger on that something was amiss. So I had a vaccine myself. I think I had the first one in 2020, and then 2021 had the second one. So what I was seeing was this little increase in baby deaths. And because midwives don't see miscarriage because they're on a different ward in a different space, they've segregated it out over years on purpose, I believe, for this very plan. So you don't follow your women. You never follow your women's outcomes. And then what law did they put in? GDPR. You can't chase your women's data. You can't chase I wonder if Mary is okay after her horrible abruption. Let's Google it, or let's go on the system and have a look. And you can't. So you can never follow trends. You can never see outcome, and you can never, ever, ever look up the medical report or whatever the findings are on the patient. So they're all locked away under GDPR. That's no coincidence. That's very orchestrated.
Seems as though they're deliberately trying to keep you guys like ignorant in the dark. That's what it seems as though they're trying to do. As to what's happening as it goes along.
Yeah, it's like the police though had the same. The GDPR law affects us all. So then when the baby deaths started to increase and it got a little bit more busier, I started realizing that I never myself ever had a COVID positive patient. I never saw it. My colleagues say they did, but nobody that I know was significantly sick from COVID. Pregnant women were actually probably a lot more protected in their pregnancy. So as the vaccine rollout's now in, you're seeing the increase in baby deaths. It's not difficult to see that. So then in 22 to 23 was the bad years. So you saw your wards were rammed, your beds blocks were rammed. Most of these women had multiple vaccines, especially if they had 2 or 3 babies in over those years. They were cranked up, and you've got to remember in pregnancy, they have to have flu, whooping cough, and COVID all in the second trimester. And what is the statistics coming out of the Peter McCulloch Foundation? The baby deaths and the miscarriage rate and the preterm birth and the abruption is mainly in the second trimester. We're also seeing fertility drop 1.44 per child per woman. That means we're below the civilization rate to reproduce our civilization. So it took a lot for me to unpick it, because what I didn't get was the dangling moment that said, the eureka moment that said, this is depopulation, Victoria, it's an agenda. And it took me a long time to really get there and not rebut it when it got to me. I had to think, I'll rebut this, but it didn't. So yeah, that was really the outcome of that really disastrous period in my career. And then it was the mass harm after. So you were then seeing so many women with raised blood pressure. And we know that the vaccines were impacting the kidneys, which is the adrenals, which is part of the blood pressure system. And yeah, it was pretty horrendous, George, to be honest. I just felt like I was giving out drugs all the time. And, you know, it was just really stressful, really sad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the big reasons, because I worked in my local sports centre at the time, and when the lockdowns first hit, they repurposed us and put us on the furlough system, and then we were actually on the local vaccine rollout clinic. Some of us were helping out indoors, you know, bringing vaccines to the nurses that were administering them. Some of us were out in the car park enforcing social distancing, all these things. That's where we were. And we had to have it initially in order to do that. If we were volunteering, we weren't forced into it or anything like that, but we did have to have it before we started if we were going to. So I was one of the first people in my local community, at least I know, that had it. Because obviously the first people coming in were elderlies in the top age brackets, and then gradually worked its way down to younger and younger people. But I'm just thinking back to it now, looking back to what it was like at the time now, and just being like, God, if the information had been available, if people weren't silenced, if people's concerns were actually, heard, if people were allowed to voice their criticisms of it, so at least people could make a better informed decision. Like people, for example, were saying it was safe, it was effective, then it went to it stops transmission and all of these things that later turned out to not be true. But I knew that being 21, 22, 23 years old at the time. I can't remember. My mind's gone blank. I can't remember exactly how old I was.
Oh,
this is
so
ridiculous.
Old.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the people that I was, very physically healthy, because I was a PT and fitness instructor, I knew that I was physically healthy. To me, it wasn't going to be much of an issue. I knew that. It might, knock me on my ass for a couple of days, but it's not like it's going to kill me.
Yeah.
To my elderly grandparent, on the other hand, to my dad, who's immunocompromised with COPD, emphysema and stuff like that, who's in his 70s, to my mother, who's slightly on the older side, I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking, oh, it stops transmission. Oh, okay. There we go. That was my case then for taking it. Not because it was really any danger to myself. And looking back at it now, I wouldn't have taken it. Especially when you see the horrific videos coming out.
That was the beauty of some of us. We didn't put ourselves first. That is humanity. It's about putting others before you. That is part of being a good human being. You did that for your parents. I did that for all of those mums and babies and my own children. So it doesn't make you bad.
All right. And we're back. Apologies about that, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to say, Victoria, with all the technical difficulties with that today, next time, if you're ever on the podcast again, which I really hope that we do, I'm coming down to Devon. I hope you know that. I'm coming down to Devon. We're doing this in person because this has been, the technical difficulties have been an absolute travesty tonight. But anyway, where were we? It was to do with the vaccines and the how much they were pushed on people. So again, we're mentioning that large reasons, and this is, I know, not just for me, and how people were talking about it before, especially people around our age groups, who weren't necessarily focused on it too much for ourselves. We focused on it because of our elderly relatives and stuff like that, and how much it was fear mongered into us. And looking back on it now, you only have to go online and type in like vaccine complications, and you have the videos of footballers in the prime of their life just falling over, damn near dropping dead. There was this horrific video I saw of this doctor pulling out this blood clot that honestly looked like something out of the Alien films. It was absolutely ridiculous. And the thing that really drives the stake into the heart of this issue is that all the evidence seems to point to is that they knew this in advance. And you mentioned the word depopulation. I can't think of a better word to describe it. And I know people, when we mention that word, all of a sudden people imagine tinfoil hat wearing weirdos, right? I hope you guys understand that this is not where that conversation is coming from. This is really, really a real thing. This is a real thing. There are people that want to drop the population in the world by massive amounts because smaller populations are easier to control. That was one of the things that the UN Agenda 2030 space that we were just on, or that I was listening to, that you were a part of, Victoria, earlier on this evening, was talking about. And especially like the UN, the World Economic Forum, and the World Health Organization, there's a really, really sinister agenda at play. And we're only seeing like the really far downstream effects of that. How much, again, was it pushed and incentivized by like upper management and stuff like that to really push these vaccines on people, despite notions of like choice and stuff like that? Because it does seem that choice is not at the, like, choice on the part of the parent to be, for example, doesn't seem to be at the heart of the policy from what I've seen.
I was quite an easygoing midwife. If a woman said to me she didn't want a vaccine, I'd go, no problem. I was just quite easygoing. I think that's that. It comes from if you are someone that is healed in yourself and you don't run on any ego and you're not triggered by anything that anybody else decides, then you're just responsible for you. So why does somebody else's decision bother you so much? So when the vaccine rollout was coming, I obviously trusted my union, the Royal College of Midwives. There's that word, the Royal College. We know that the Royal College, I've just seen something today. Why do we even have Royal Colleges? So when I've got a union who has been a credible, I say that in, loose terms, incredible, a union support for over 100 years. Oh, well, particularly their union was quite more recent, but the actual education side of the Royal College of Midwives has been ongoing for a long, long time. So you don't doubt these people who you've known for or known of, whether it's a governing body, an actual NHS with its trust values, core values, whatever you want to call it, employment law, health and safety law, all of that. Why would I doubt it? Why would I doubt that? So for me, it was difficult. But as soon as I knew, and they came at me with a Warren's Bakery bacon roll to have COVID jab in one arm and the flu in the other, I was like, no. And I remember my boss coming up to me with the sharps bin, and she said, "You're vulnerable." And I was like, no, I'm not. Well, you've got diabetes. And I was like, and? Doesn't mean anything. If anything's going to kill me, it's diabetes, okay? Because that's the worst thing. But to stick that in my arm, that's not going to happen. So they were obviously trying to incentivize Warren's, which now I know Warren's have made a huge amount of money through the hospital because it's Warren's Bakery, which is in the foyer of the hospital. Why are you taking a vaccine for a and I was just like, oh my God, what are they doing? So it was a lot of that just started to make me think, you're not just pushing this, and you're now incentivizing having a vaccine. But the other day I got a letter from the NHS that said, join our trial for blood pressure and you'll get a £10 voucher. Could you imagine how many people are skint at the minute and will do that? My father-in-law got one because I was looking after him after his recent collapsed lung. And I just put it straight in the bin. I was like, don't even get involved. Don't do it. So I just think the majority of the NHS took up the vaccine, didn't they? And now I'm not going to say any names, but I met a nurse recently who said to me, I had 2 vaccines and I wouldn't go near him now. So over 80% of the NHS staff have not taken up the COVID vaccine, which has now dropped the flu vaccine uptake naturally with a questionable evidence.
Yeah, I think the biggest, one of the biggest things I took away from that interview I mentioned with Michael Knowles and Andy Wakefield was that I believe it was just around the turn of the century, just as Tony Blair came in as Prime Minister, that really goes back to just questioning the motives that these things are coming from. Because he mentioned that, when antibiotics first came on the scene, or when vaccines first came on the scene, whether it was polio or whatever, it was like life-changing. People were dying of all these things so early. Life expectancy was awful. When they first came on, it was, truly a miracle in many instances. And now due to overuse and abuse and things like that, obviously, things like, what do they call them, like super bacteria and all things like that, really hyper-resistant stuff. But just goes to show that I believe, according to Andy Wakefield anyways, in this country, when people were questioning the MMR vaccine, so having measles, mumps and rubella all at the same time, and initially you were able to get the vaccines all separately, and it's pretty much not long after Blair came in, he stopped the importation of the individual vaccines, so you couldn't just go and get a measles vaccine. You couldn't just go and get rubella vaccine, whatever it was. You had to get them all together. Despite knowing that there was interference patterns with the way these vaccines acted, and that they can cause potentially really bad effects when you mix them together. But the safety trials hadn't been done. They were done, you'd expect them to be done over like 10 years or whatever, but they were only done over like 5 days. It was truly, truly harrowing. And I believe you go back to the Blair administration, I think is when a lot of the problems in this country really, really started, if you ask me, just from a bunch of other things, things in the conflicts around the world and all stuff like that. But the way I visualized it, what seems to be going on, and why I want to ask you, like, whether it's the UN, whether it's these other agendas that are at play, or these organizations that are at play, the way I sort of see it, I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary on Netflix known as Fear City. It's about the mob in New York in the 80s and how they took them down. And they were giving this visual about how the mob is set up. So you have like the soldiers that are underneath these, the captains, and then you have the captains that report to the underboss, and then you have the boss at the top. So you have this very hierarchical structure within the family. And sort of drew me a parallel between that. You sort of have like the midwives that are operating. I'm not comparing midwives directly to mafia soldiers, by the way. I want to make that perfect.
George.
I want to make that perfectly clear. I'm not directly comparing the two.
I'm
but you
not
have
offended by anything you say. Don't worry.
There you go. You have the midwives that sort of carry out the bidding of the captains, which I liken to the managers in this instance, just carrying out the orders that they're told to, and then you're obviously going to have something at the top. Do we have like any idea on what that sort of is, or am I really digging deep into conspiracy theories here?
No, I think when you follow the money, when you start looking at the money and you start looking at your country and you start looking at the history of your country, and then you look. So let's take the NHS for instance. It was born in 1947, and back then. And let's just particularly focus on maternity. Back then, every woman delivered at home, pretty much, with a doctor's support if needed. Between 1947 and 1970s, it tipped and everybody delivered in hospital. Very quickly. Now, when people say, oh, so many people died, yeah, but who's given us our data? The people that run the world. So now I question everything and I say, well, if we've only ever had stillbirth data from one entity and that's the NHS, how do we know it's accurate? How do we not know that the stillbirth data has projected a poor model of care into making money? So people argue with me, oh, the stillbirth rate was 30%. Well, how do you know? Well, the NHS told me. What, you trust the NHS that's just put a jab in you that can kill you and give you myocarditis and you drop dead with white clots? Hello. This is my argument now. I'm like, I think we all have to sit on the fence now and start thinking, well, and make our own decisions. So when I think about that, and I think about that, people that birthed at home cost nothing but the midwife's time. Yeah? You think now there are 600,000 births a year on average. It's dropped, the fertility rates, the birth rates. Half of those women are induced. And just under half of those women have a cesarean section. And a cesarean section is around up to about $8,000, depending if you're private or private's about 10. Why would they want you at home? You make money for the system. So when you start looking at it like that and you start thinking, well, why do they want bums in hospital beds? Why do they want birth trapped into the system? And you start looking at the money, you then start looking at your own CEO. You then start looking at who your directors are, and then you start looking at them up on Companies House, and then you start looking at some connection. Where is the money coming from? Then you start looking at where shares are, or you start digging. It's all there. The thing I've learned is if they tell you the truth and you still go ahead and use it, there's no karmic debt to repay. They've told you, and you still got on the bandwagon and had a baby in a hospital. That's how I see it, right? So when you start looking into all of that and you start looking at it that way and you learn and educate yourself in that manner, it's not possible for you to unsee it. And I don't believe anybody that goes down this road will not come across Agenda 30, the World Health Organization, the UN agenda, the Agenda 2030, the Agenda 21, which will then dig them into a theory of schooling, chemtrails. You might not believe chemtrails, do I? I do, because my friend's an ex-pilot. So did I before? Probably not. So all of these little things have opened up my world into realizing that your life is an agenda. Your life has a plan, and you are just a slave to the system. So for me, educating myself not only just on the vaccine, I, in a way, thank COVID for coming into my life, because it opened up my eyes on a scale that I'm able now to leave a different legacy for my children.
I think COVID was the big thing that opened a lot of people's eyes. And I'd go back and think, like, because I was one of those people at the time was like, oh, I could get used to this. This is fine. I'm like, I look back in horror now, realizing the power and cash transfer that it was, that, whether it be we're talking about digital ID, cashless society they were trying to groom us into when we were in school and stuff like that. They started bringing the system in then, and that's where, again, I go back and think now,
I was like, George, remember? 42. Still a lot older than you, steady.
No, but it was a thing. They brought it in when we were in school. It would be a little thing on the wall, and it would be linked to your fingerprint. You'd have your fingerprint in, you put your money in, and then you pay with your fingerprint. So yeah, you'd have this balance which would come up to your screen. It'd be linked to your fingerprint. This was when I was in year 7. So I would have been, this started coming in when I was in year 7. And then soon, you can just imagine that. You've only got to think that. Well, imagine that money system there, which the minute you hand over that cash, you don't have that money anymore. No. Imagine then that is linked to your political opinions. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how you end up with a system like communist China. It instantly it becomes apparent, and instantly it becomes apparent how the Labour government in this country tried to bring that in. And once you mentioned it before, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
No. And would you go back? Would you go back to unseeing it?
Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely not. As harrowing as it is, because ultimately it's the classic illustration of the emu that digs its head in the sand. You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you dig your head into the sand. Whatever's going to be coming is going to come in.
Yeah.
And I hate using this term, but that it almost like is getting unplugged from the Matrix in a way. The Matrix in a way is very prophetic in this way. I don't agree with necessarily everyone that uses that term, but again, it is like once that cord has been pulled and now you see the world for what it actually is, it's like, oh shit, we're in really, really deep shit, yeah. We're in really, really deep shit. Yeah. And, especially with the government we have in the country at the moment, it's very, very scary.
Yeah,
it's very scary.
But we do have the power as people to use some of their own laws against them. And I'm using the GDPR law against 5 companies at the moment in the administrative court for using my data like I'm not entitled to withhold it from anybody. And today I had a victory in Plymouth County Court against a debt collection agency that took my data from my employer without any permission. And I think when people start grasping that you live at home and you're busy and you're working 9 till 5 and you're working to live for the weekends and you're working to live for one holiday a year, and Christmas comes around and you love a bit of autumn and you love a little bit of the pumpkin picking. Before you know it, you're back round another year again. People actually sat back and sat where I am. This time slows down. And you have more time to think, and you have more time to feel, and you have more time to understand and reflect and allow your heart to make the right decisions rather than your fast-paced, illogical brain that is speeding up. And I think for me, taking control of my life in every aspect, including my health, my employment, has been the most profound, because I wasn't in a good place last year. Or the year before that and the year before that. I have been in the darkest 5 years of my life. And I'm a very energetic being. I'm a very positive, optimistic person, and I couldn't see past it. It was so bad. And it wasn't just COVID. It was my health. It was my diabetes. It was all of it. So I think if people just have an open mind to looking that it isn't just you working 9 to 5 and there is another choice, and they go, well, what choice? Well, your choice. What would you choose to do and you choose to be? And if they say, well, I just choose not to work and be free, and well, go and be free and choose not to work. Because you might think it's not that simple, but it really is. It just means you've got to cut back on absolutely everything and you've got to make a different choice. And that's literally how I've lived my life, particularly more in the last 3 months. I've never felt more empowered, but my health's much harder to deal with, particularly with my diabetes when it's stressful. So I think when you say the Matrix, whatever that looks like, there is something else there outside of the world you once lived in. That is probably what you call your own mind and matrix.
Yeah, absolutely. That it is kind of what it's like. And it's always like, again, the old adage people say is like, oh, you can't pull the wool over my eyes. It was like, this wool was over all our eyes initially. And then again, it's almost like a lot of people, I think, are slowly realizing it, but they don't want to take that wool off because they don't want what comes along with that. They don't want with acknowledging what comes along with that. I think a lot of them, much as very much the same as people who you said want to speak out against these things, but they're very scared due to, how we've seen the justice, quote unquote, justice system be used against political dissidents, especially in this country. Since speaking out, so you can give people a bit of an illustration of the things that you've been through. You mentioned obviously being in court today with the debt collection agency, and thank God you won, obviously. What have your experiences been like since you've spoke out with all of these things? I know, for example, that you've had death threats. You've obviously been accused of being a baby killer, all of these things. What things have happened? And obviously I think the biggest thing for people to know is how you've reacted to that and obviously not crumbled under that pressure.
Probably because I'm naive to think that everybody thinks like me and people won't be mean to each other. So I'm very naive, and I think everybody's a lover in this world and everyone's compassionate and everybody's things like me. And don't get me wrong, I'm not always an angel. My husband will tell you otherwise. I can be a right devil sometimes. And I'm annoying, or I'm loud, or I, henpecking the kids, whatever. We're just human, fighting and living through this world. But I think what it is when it happened, I was that shocked that my brain didn't compute what was just said to me, and I just continued the conversation like blah, 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 blah. So when I whistle blew and went on Facebook, I think it was, or TikTok, and posted my exit interview, and obviously sorry, my laptop's about to die, and I'm just like texting my husband saying about my charger, and is that okay? And I just said to this director that coerced me into a call when I look back, because I actually had done my exit interview already with a HR member of staff, and she was even saying, I don't really know where to go with all this. And I'm like, the police? Maybe the police, and, maybe the director, and that you can back up. But she just didn't know what to do with it. And that's what was really sad. And I thought, this is really, really sad. I've really got to get out with this information. So when the director's PA emailed me and said, it's such a shame I never, ever, ever kept all my NHS emails, because I would have had so much more. I just didn't think at the time. And he coerced me into this call. Please, can you meet us? They'd like to speak to you about your exit interview. And I thought, well, I've already done that. And I didn't turn up because I'd just done the exit interview with the HR lady, which is part of the employment. Anyway, so when I didn't show up, they sent an immediate response and said, we're really disappointed we didn't see you today. I hope you're well, but here's another interview. Here's another meeting. So they sent me another MS Teams meeting. I was like, what? And then I thought, okay, maybe they do want to fix this. Maybe you need to find a remedy here. Maybe you can salvage your career, or maybe you can work from the outside, all these sorts of things. So I went to him, and he basically said, whistleblowers go missing overnight. And again, my brain just didn't compute the whole thing. It was like, kept talking, thank you very much for your time. And I wanted to almost be like, don't be scared. I'm quite good at putting on that front. Like if I was live on something and something happened, I would try my best nobody would know it happened. So I actually messaged this person directly on MS Teams just to say, hello, can I get the new CEO's email address, and just to show him I'm not scared of him. I have no fear of you. And then I got a cease and desist from the hospital when I shared my exit interview online. Now, I was very lucky because Dr. Cartland had shared my exit interview to quite a big following. So I wasn't that worried that if I had to delete it with my 1,000 followers at the time, then it's out there. I'm okay with it. So I did delete it, but I did reply to the hospital's legal team and said, a notice of conditional acceptance. I will take it down if you come back to me and tell me where I've breached GDPR, which I didn't name anybody. And could you please tell me why your director has threatened me and told me that whistleblowers go missing overnight? What would possess them to say this? No response, complete radio silence. So I dealt with that, and I'll be honest, I was quite anxious. Stopped running in the dark. In fact, I've stopped running altogether since then. I haven't run really since then at all. Really struggled with it. And then, again, because I was so traumatized by this, I can't remember which way round all this happened. That's how dark this period was last year. Because I can't get the MS Teams meeting, and I can't get the data subject access to find out when that meeting happened. Because I was so traumatized by this whole period, I can't quite remember. So I think it was after mid-April, I think. And I then get a notification on X. It's down. Sorry, George. It's in the brown, the grey laptop bag on the.
It's in the bag.
Yes, on the bag. Sorry. And so I think around that time, I know that things were unsettling inside of me. You're thinking you're doing something. You do that whole, oh my God, am I going to get killed? Oh my God, am I going to be assassinated? your brain starts going absolutely crazy. So on the 30th of March, I get a notification on X. Now, I was never very good on X. I only opened my own Twitter a year before, I think it was, and I got locked out and never could get back into it. So I opened one under the With Women movement, which was the campaign I started for safer maternity. So what then happened was I went on X. This was exactly my face. I'm like, oh, I'll have a little nosy on X tonight. And I go on, and there's this horrific statement saying that I was responsible for the death of a baby. They named the baby, and they named the family, and they named my hospital. Oh my God. I felt sick to my stomach.
Make your blood run cold.
I mean, immediately, George, I wrote on there, the comments are still there. I've got screenshots of it all, but I basically just said, this is a mistaken identity. I wasn't on shift when this baby was born. So I was absolutely devastated. And then I tried to contact the you can see, look, it triggers me a little bit.
Take your time. Take all the time you need.
I emailed the author directly, privately, and they responded a day later saying, absolutely not, it was you. Your name was called into account, all this sort of stuff. It was really brutal. So it was actually Easter weekend last year, so I couldn't get hold of anybody. And at the time I was still employed. So my employer did a very crafty move. Even though I walked out and didn't give a reason, I just said, my diabetes can't cope with all this. I can't cope with all the stress I'm going. And I never gave a sick note, but they still continued to pay me till the middle of April, because they knew that if I made an error in that time, they could probably get me for employment law, under employment contractual law, and they can get me under my NMC code. So I was being very, very dubious about what I was writing. I was being very, okay, I'm just going to write these things. And then when that came out, I actually emailed the hospital, the comms team, the lot, and the coroner, and said, look, this has come out. It's absolutely devastated me. Can I have some support? And I actually did share one of the replies online, because I was trying to say to the trolls, this is actually my director of midwifery. And she said, you're a valued colleague. Just ignore it. Imagine being told you're a baby killer, just ignore it. But it wasn't the statement so much, George, because it was the trolling. That was the worst. I just saw these words, baby killer, and I was so traumatized. I don't even know who wrote it. But I remember,
it's a horrific accusation.
I was like, oh my God. Then I saw a picture of my Instagram page. So then my face was up there. And then someone had taken a photo of my kids, and I was like, what the hell is happening?
Very scary. Very scary. And that's the kind of thing that, people hear that, and there'll be one person somewhere that wants to go and enact vengeance on that. You know what I mean? It's like with people who have very big social media followings, obviously they're very careful with posting photos of like where they live, very careful when they're out with their families, because they know that there's nut jobs out there that will want to do very bad things, So you being accused of being a baby killer, many people are fathers, many people are mothers, many people have just, got young babies themselves. To hear that somebody's gone and done that, it's a truly, truly awful thing. And if you're going to say something like that, you better make sure that it is correct about that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was really, really tough. And I actually then just did a knee jerk, get rid of it. I shut it down. I came off. I cried. I didn't sleep. I didn't, I'm on insulin. I didn't eat. I was an absolute car crash mess. It was so awful. And it didn't go away, because it rumbled in the top of my brain that I had the BBC at the time and Sky covering my campaign, and then one of them dropped me. She wouldn't even speak to me, because she said, she actually said to me recently, I was really sad that you dropped that story with me, and I was like, I think you find it was you. You didn't want to do it with me because you questioned if I was a baby killer. So they sabotaged a lot of my life, but I've been very patient with that process. But then in the middle of April, 2 midwives made their own statement about me and wrote it as well. So that then escalated it even further. And then they put their statement on top of the other statement in thread. And the thread got more traction. And I didn't see any of this. I was sent this from a manager at the hospital. She said, you need to take some legal advice. And it was horrible. So in the end, I went away and I shut everything down and I just licked some wounds and tried to get in touch with the coroner. And then I got lots of evidence back, which I'm not going to share yet, but I've got lots of documents back. And then I opened up my ex in December under an alias name at the time that I can't mention now. And in the January, I decided to put my face to it. So when I actually put my face to it and basically said, I'm going to bring the truth about maternity, I went from 400 followers to 17,000 overnight. So it was just because I shared that exit interview and the documents and the cease and desists and the letter to the NMC. And I just started to... Now, what I never did was I never, ever mentioned anything about that family. I never brought any attention to it. Now, what happened in the February was that a very large account shared my face and that statement and called me a fraud. And I said, right, that's it, I've had enough. So I got in contact with, Liz Gunn. She's a journalist, independent journalist. She's going to cover the story as it evolves in the court and things. So she and I reached out to the large account and asked for her validity of the claims, and she apologized and said she got it wrong. So that was huge to me. That filled my chest with, she couldn't verify it. Hang on a minute. So I think at that point I thought, if this happens again, I haven't got a leg to stand on. I've only got a few weeks before the claim runs out of time. So I needed to get, so I went to a solicitor and explained my case, and they took it on, and then I got a barrister. So that's where I'm at with it now. But you think about Lucy Letby and being in prison and being you call her a baby killer. People call Lucy Letby a baby killer, and they call Beverly Allett a baby killer, and I think it's Rebecca Layton. But then I got called that, so I then started thinking the police were going to come to my house. I was absolutely broken.
No, I can imagine. I can absolutely imagine. And you gotta put a fair, bit of suspicion on the police nowadays, because we've seen horrendous treatment at the hands of the police. There was a horrific video that came out the other day that's been widely shared on social media now. Even prominent accounts in America have picked it up, of the police tasing and pepper spraying. Well, it wasn't quite pepper spray, it was like a variation of pepper spray. A 93-year-old man who was confined to the chair with dementia, and later on, 3 weeks later, he died because of that treatment. It was truly, 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 truly awful stuff. So you can only imagine what the police sometimes are gonna come and do. You know what I mean? I've seen a lot more evidence now that shows that they're like a political enforcement arm rather than a true police force in a lot of instances. But yeah, you mentioned that prominent account, which later went back and recanted it and said that they got it wrong, which is obviously good. That's obviously what they should do if they did get it wrong. By that time, though, you mentioned that they had about 700,000 followers, I believe, or somewhere around that mark, that all potentially could have seen that. And by that point, reputationally, the damage is done in a lot of instances in the court of public opinion.
I think it had 750 views when I looked at it.
Oh, right. Okay. I might have got that wrong. I might have got that wrong.
She had a large following over. It was somewhere about 160,000, I think.
Oh, okay. I might have got that wrong there. I might have got the follower count and the views mixed up.
Yeah, but on Twitter, when you start seeing the influential accounts, who are speaking out about the health topics, an account like that could have ruined everything again. So it was actually, I'll be honest, Dave Cartland has been a huge support to me, and he's a very targeted man. When you actually get to know David, he's an amazing, kind man who's very, very broken after the way he's been treated. But if I didn't have David over the last year to, bat off these difficult tweets or difficult days, I don't think I would have got through. He's been really instrumental in my recovery. Huge.
he somebody that's suffered very similar in ways that you have had as well for for speaking? I'm not familiar with Dr. Cartland. I know you mentioned his name on the other podcast. I'm not familiar with him. Is he again another person that's spoken out against these things and suffered the persecution because of it?
Yeah, he's probably about to lose his license.
Oh, is he really?
You should go and look at his Twitter and follow. He's got some. He's trolled significantly every day. The difference with me, I'm trolled, I block them. I block every single troller and I never engage. I don't give them any energy. And interestingly enough, since I've joined Jim Ferguson's Freedom Train International, I never really get trolled.
No, I can imagine, because he's very prominent and again seems like a voice of integrity. Correct me if I'm wrong, he's recently been out in Romania covering what's going on in Romania at the moment, hasn't he? It seems that increasingly, I saw a troubling stat the other day that it seems that 1.7 million deceased people were registered to vote in that election, and the electoral fraud that's allegedly been occurred because of France and Moldova and the videos that are coming out. I think that place in particular, Romania at the moment, it is primed to go, if you know what I mean, because of what's going on over there, the so-called democracy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like following Jim's stuff. He's does a lot of good work from what I've seen.
Yeah.
So one thing I was going to get onto now, because I'm aware we've only got a little bit of time left, and try and round it up with hopefully a little bit of positivity. Do you, for example, with the NHS, thinking about everything that we've talked about today, and also things that we haven't had a chance to talk about, do you see it improving in any way? So you mentioned the NHS around here. The person who had the big birth idea for the NHS literally lived 10 minutes down the road from where I live, and Iron Bevan. So he was one of the big brainchilds behind the NHS. Do you see it improving? And if there is a way to get it to improve, what big things do you think need to happen for maternity, but also as a whole for the NHS, the culture and stuff?
Yeah, I think we have to have hope for our society in terms of requiring acute medicine. I think we've gone over the top with everything. I'm a believer now, if we break our finger and it's doable, we strap it up ourselves and we learn how to deal with things like that. The cuts, the grazes. I'm trying to teach my children this year about how they look after themselves if there isn't a system. I think that's what we have to start thinking about. So I do believe that we have to have hope that anything can change. Everything goes around in a circle, doesn't it? Everything goes around, comes around. So even if this stage of our lives that we're in with the Agenda 30, they won't stay up there forever. Nothing stays evil or bad forever, or nothing stays good forever either. But I feel like we're coming into a time of good. So I would like to say that, yes, the NHS is salvageable. I think the only way to do that is to obliterate the corruption in the management, and to have healthcare does not mix with business. But business has become medicalized, which has become a business, and healthcare is making money. So we need to stop looking at the people as individual monies above their head, a figure. And until we do that comes from the grassroots up. The people have to stop using the system unless they absolutely categorically need it. So people need to start learning about their own health, understanding about their biology, understanding about their body, and then looking at how in community you can teach each other. We need to start getting some natural remedy and support strategies around our communities again and in our villages. So I'm a believer that needs to happen, and that will be easier rurally when you have your communities. But when you're in the cities, you're more fragmented. It's much harder to really accomplish that. So I think everything is salvageable, including the NHS. I think having a maternity inquiry is important, but I know that it won't happen because it will expose too much. But if we do have an inquiry, it needs to be... Now, people argue, we need an inquiry because we need criminal outcome, but we know that the judicial system is rigged. So why don't we just do a people's tribunal which is run by the people for the people, which was done with the Darling River in Australia. The people ran that inquiry about the Darling River and the toxic water. Why can't we do that here? So there's a lot for me to think about. Do I particularly want to be involved in that? No, I don't. In a strange way, I don't. My quality is to nurture people. I would like to do a lot more work with the healing of this trauma that the NHS has left as a remnants in people's lives, and that goes on for decades. And it ripples through families. You know, my auntie told me the most saddest story about her birth. She died last year, and I didn't find her until later in life because I didn't know who my grandfather was. And when I found my grandfather, I found my dad's sister. She told me the saddest story about her birth of her first child who died. And that stayed with her until the day she died. She said, it's never left me. And it's every day I think about it. Every day it doesn't leave. And so this is what my point is about the birth trauma. But the NHS has caused trauma. So I think the only way that we're going to salvage it is by taking control as people and just saying, thank you. No, thank you. I'll do it this way first. And then draw upon it if you really need it. But we also, George, need to realise that people will die. That is natural part of life. But we fear that part of life. We always seem to be frightened of dying. So we're like, just keep me alive forever. Well, we need to accept that babies die. They shouldn't die of neglect. They shouldn't die of gross negligence. But now we can't differentiate between the babies that would have died statistically and the babies that are dying from gross negligence. And now we've got a problem with mothers in groups, which is they're within their rights to shout and scream and make noise that their babies were neglected. But now we can't differentiate the ones that might have died anyway.
I think that's the biggest point.
It's a big mess.
Yeah, not being the point you made there, not being able to differentiate between,
causation.
a tragedy that very likely could not have been prevented, and one that definitely could have been. And then, especially when you mix into account there's sweeping under the rug as well, or trying to hide and obfuscate these things from parents, from the wider public, it's truly, truly worrying. And that's the point that really doubles down on that worry for me, especially people like me with thinking about bringing children into the world, is that but they're not doing the thing and owning up to this. You know, they're not admitting that there's this problem in place, either because they're scared to or because they're benefiting from it, or maybe a bit of both. Who knows? Some people are going to be scared, some people are going to be benefited from it.
Say nothing and we're not guilty, but it's all over the newspapers again. Every day there's a story about maternity.
Like the hear no evil, say no evil, do no evil kind of thing. But basically, the thing I got from that is almost like similar to how if a brand is doing something that you don't agree with, you vote with your wallet, you don't buy that brand anymore, whether it's because of the Bovea stuff that was coming in, people were boycotting Arla products and stuff like that. So first off, not using the system unless we absolutely have to, for whatever reason, almost like, again, voting with your wallet kind of thing. And then maybe setting up this kind of people's tribunal in the future, having some kind of inquiry to really make people aware of what's going on. Would you say that's basically where you would sum up what you said there with how maybe it can be salvaged?
Yeah, but loads of other things, just in your own family home. Stop eating 3 meals a day. Eat to nourish, fast a bit more, to cut back on what you don't need to nurture, that you're not nurturing your body with and your mind and your soul. It's a whole process. If you start loving yourself and you love every part of yourself, you would not walk into that system to get a plaster on a broken bone. You won't go near it. You know?
Yeah, and obviously the biggest thing that a lot of people don't want to think about as well is how their own lifestyle factors, that their own lifestyle choices matter as well, obviously, which goes without saying. Well, it's nearly 10 o'clock now, Victoria, so thank you very much as always. Where can people find you if they want to go and find out a little bit more about what you do, whether it's socials or whatever?
Yeah, so at the minute I'm really only on X. My Instagram was deleted, so I'm not giving them my space back. The Uncensored Midwife on X. I'm doing a live tomorrow night with Jim Ferguson as one of his ambassadors on the Agenda 30. So we're doing a live. Got a really good girl in there, Cassie Langford. She's amazing about the 5G, solar panels, lithium batteries. You definitely want to interview her. She's brilliant. So I'm getting her on tomorrow. And also there is a nurse I would like to mention, Justine Winter. Have you followed her on LinkedIn?
I don't believe I've followed her. I think I've been reposted a couple of your posts, and I believe you've mentioned her in a couple of your posts recently. I'll go back and have a look once we finish now.
Justine is actually talking about the Welsh hospital that you've just talked about. She's unearthed a huge story there. Is it an Ivor Bevan?
Well, that's the name of the gentleman that came up with the NHS. Yeah, that's the name of the gentleman in the 1940s. It was the original brainchild for the NHS. But you have many different hospitals around Wales. Right. So, it looks like I'll be reaching out to her.
Blowing nurse, and she has got the most unbelievable story. I've got a lot of time for her. So she would be also another good one for you for NHS nursing.
Well, Justine, looking at you, we'll be in contact very, very soon. We will be in contact very, very soon. Okay. Yeah, we'll work out the time zones and we'll get in touch. Anyway, thank you very much, Victoria. This has been amazing. And looking forward to more about what's coming out with regards to... Have you still got some court cases and stuff going on at the moment? Some litigation stuff going on?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of my book. It's something comes up, so I navigate away. I'm still working through that. I'm just finding a new career path for myself, really, but I just need a bit more time.
Awesome. And I'll certainly pay, when we're going to sit down again, hopefully, I'll certainly pay a trip down to Devon and navigate the technical difficulties a little bit better.
We'll get our headphones on and just live, shall we?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, hope you enjoyed that, guys. Hope you found it useful. Obviously, enjoy might be the wrong word because there's a lot of obviously morbid, kind of scary topics in there, but things that we do really need to start talking about a little bit more and having positive discourse with. Victoria, again, thank you ever so much as always. And what we'll do, guys, we'll catch up with you again very soon. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. My conversation with Mrs. Victoria Rixon. Hope you enjoyed it. Much as a conversation with such morbid topics can be enjoyed, hope you find it useful more than anything. Question I leave you guys with today is, do you think that the NHS can be salvaged, reformed, after you've heard everything that's going on with it at the moment? And what are your thoughts on how we do that? Do you have things to add to Victoria's thoughts? Do you have things that maybe could be done better? Leave your thoughts, as always, down below. More positive discourse is usually always what we need. Otherwise, have a tremendous morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Diolch yn fawr for watching and listening. Hwyl fawr and Godspeed. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for taking the time to listen or watch this episode of Voice of the Valleys. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, wherever you are. Hwyl fawr and Godspeed.